Good evening, members of the public, councillors and officers. I'm Councillor David O'Mahony, Chair of the Planning Application Committee. We're not expecting a fire drill this evening. If the alarm sounds, you'll be directed to the nearest and safest exit by members of the team. I'll introduce to my left members of the committee, and surrounding me are officers of the borough. Members of the committee, are you happy for me to approve the meetings from the last PAC meeting held March 19th? Have apologies for absence, Jenny?
Thank you, Chair. Tonight we've got apologies from Councillor Mary Glowett. She's being subbed by Councillor Helen Whitcroft, and apologies from Councillor Kevin Thompson. He's being subbed by Councillor Nirmal Kang.
Thank you, Jenny. Do any members of the committee have any declarations of interest they need to state before we begin? Can you also declare these before each individual item if something is made aware to you? If there are any members present not on the committee, maybe speaking tonight, please declare if you have any declarations of interest regarding any of the applications on the agenda. I would like to identify members present who are not committee members for the benefit of the public. So if you're an elected official but you're not a member of the PAC, can you put your hand up? Okay, so if you're not a member of the committee but you're a councillor, can you raise your hands?
So, reference the item 5 on the agenda. When I was portfolio holder, I got a tour of Gordon Murray. I've been there for a private event that was held last year and a number of other events as well. But obviously, reference this application, I come with an open mind. Thank you.
Just for transparency, on item 4, I am a trustee of an almshouse in Bagshot.
I am in the same position as Councillor Garrett, but it was my time as mayor, not as portfolio holder. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Again, item 5, I've received, I suspect, like everybody else, a communication from a planning consultant in that regard, and I also attended a site visit the day before yesterday, I think it was. But as ever, I approach the matter with an open mind. Thank you.
Councillor Nirmal Kang.
Item number 5. Yes, I have been to that site, and I was open to some suggestions of plans, etc. So, but I come with an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you. I have spoken to Paul's charity, not sort of around this application. I have also visited Higham Park with others, and I have also, I'm in the process of being nominated as Windlesham's representative on WC Lees, so that has an almshouse association. But I come to this meeting with an opener mind as everyone else.
Thank you. Councillor Hough.
Relating to item 5, I also received correspondence from the applicant and attended the site visit on Tuesday.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. On item 4, I've been contacted by residents opposed to the application, but I still have an open mind on that. And item 5, I received the email that Councillor Whitcroft mentioned, and I still have an open mind on that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Oh, Councillor Garrett, going for a second round.
I didn't mention the same email, just to cover that off.
Thank you. Duly noted. Before we start, I'm going to reorder tonight's agenda items. So we're going to start with item 6, followed by item 5, and then item 4. So first up, item 6, application 260186, 44 Byron Avenue. Ms Speed, if you'd like to introduce the application, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is being presented to Planning Committee because the applicant is a staff member. The application site is located within the settlement area of Camberley. The application seeks planning permission for the erection of single-storey front extensions with alterations to the roof, internal layout and fenestration. This photo shows the front elevation of the dwelling, and these photos show the relationships with the nearest neighbours, noting the side to rear relationships. Not there yet. Oh, here, sorry. The existing and proposed floor plans show the extensions shaded in yellow here on the proposed floor plan, so it shows a modest amount of additional floor space to be added. And these are the existing elevations, and then the proposed elevations, which show the proposal would not significantly impact on the appearance of the dwelling. Therefore, the proposal is acceptable in terms of its impact on the character of the area, neighbouring residential amenity and highways, and is recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you very much. And members, do you have any questions or points of clarification for the officer on this application? The officer's recommendation is to grant subject to conditions. Can I have a proposer and a seconder? Proposer, Councillor Wilson. Seconder, Helen Whitcroft. Okay, can we put that to the vote, please? Jodie?
So all those who are for the officer recommendation to grant subject to conditions, please raise your hands. That's not unanimous?
No, it's not, because Councillor Karen hasn't voted.
Yep. Okay, well, I will read the names out, and if you put them down. So Councillor Sean Garrett, Councillor Helen Whitcroft, Councillor Julie Hode, Councillor Dave Hoff, Councillor David O'Mahony, Councillor Jonathan Quinn, Councillor Victoria Wheeler, Councillor David Whitcroft, Councillor Valerie White, and Councillor Richard Wilson. Anyone against? And do we have any abstentions? That's Councillor Nermal Khan.
(260186) has been granted subject to conditions. Next up tonight, item 5, application 251264, Hyams Park, Chertsey Road. Ms Turney? Whenever you're ready, if you want to present the application.
Planning permission is sought for the partial redevelopment of the Molecule Building and Diner building, including associated landscaping and parking, to facilitate a mixed educational and community and storage use. This application relates to the Molecule Building and the adjacent Diner building and the surrounding landscape area, which forms part of the wider Gordon Murray site. The application relates to the red line on the screen, and then the wider site is outlined in blue. So the existing access from Chertsey Road, which the access itself would remain unaltered. There is another access point from Chertsey Road, which those members who came on the site visit would have used. So the image here is the middle access. The members would have come in from this side, and then there is an additional access from Hyams Lane as well. So here's some site photos. This is the main front elevation of the existing building. This is one of the wings proposed to be removed, and this area would accommodate the new access along here with associated parking. So you can orientate yourself here. This is the wing on the screen to be removed, and the new road would come round. The first image on the left-hand side is views this way here, if you can see that way, and then the one on the right-hand side is the elevation looking this way. And then this is the existing walkway that links the existing molecule building to the diner building that's to be removed. So this is the proposed site plan. The main access would come in, as I mentioned, off Chertsey Road and curve round to the parking areas, connecting to the existing access point on Hyams Lane. So the existing road will connect round this way. The two wings proposed to be removed are outlined in red and will provide additional parking in one of the areas. A new access road is proposed to connect from this side here. This will allow movement through the site for the student workshop area, enabling circulation between the wings. There will be 88 parking spaces proposed and 24 cycle parking spaces. The wall garden area will be partly used for the biodiversity net gain. So the aerial view, as part of the redevelopment, the proposal will remove the second floor and the tops of the towers, the dome features. This in turn will reduce the amount of built form and floor space. So this is just useful images that you can compare where you can see that the second floor is being removed. This image is useful for the illustration. So for the members that didn't visit the site, you can see that the second floor will be removed and the alterations to the front elevation. The proposal includes a new main entrance featuring pillars that will create a roof overhang along with roof lantern features. So again, this is the proposed front elevation and a CGI image. And then these are some further images of the elevations. And then these are the wings. So in terms of the floor plan, the ground floor will include the main teaching areas for the practical work, the entrance area and the communal spaces, and the first floor will be mainly used, and then we move on to the first floor, and the first floor will be mainly used for the theory rooms. This is an indicative landscape plan which shows the removal of 13 trees to be replaced by 14 trees within the main site and 45 trees in the orchard, which is part of the biodiversity net gain. The proposal supports delivering sustainable redevelopment of the site to ensure long-term education and community use of the molecule building as originally agreed under the original permission. Evidence submitted under condition 32 of that confirms the building is no longer fit for purpose in its existing form, and the proposed partial redevelopment provides a justified reduction in floor space to enable a viable, well-structured educational facility with associated community uses. While resulting in some loss of employment floor space, the scheme would generate skilled jobs, support specialist engineering education aligned with the business needs, and deliver a clear economic and social and community benefit consistent with the objectives of the original permission. The proposed development would satisfy the criteria of paragraph 154 of the NPPF and is therefore not inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. For this reason, no further assessment of harm to openness or very special circumstances is required. In terms of the design, while the removal of the domes would result in the loss of this specific architectural feature, the towers themselves would be preserved, ensuring the building's overall architectural merit is maintained. The proposed crown roof design would include, the domes would include the air source heat pumps and associated plant, which would result in the building adhering to Part L of the building regulations and achieve efficiency of the building under the building regulations. It's considered that the design of the redevelopment of the building would respond positively to the existing built form whilst introducing necessary upgrades to support its continued use. The proposal would be acceptable on heritage grounds, amenity, highway, ecology and drainage, and therefore the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions in the legal agreement to secure the B&G.
Thank you, Ms Turney. Members of the committee, do you have any questions? Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, it's great to see an educational establishment that's a little bit different coming into the area, which will hopefully bring in some new talent. One comment and then a question. The comment is it's unfortunate that our friends at England Heritage National England, yes, thank you, had an issue with the student accommodation. It would have been really good to have student accommodation on site. The alternative is now that anybody that's going to be studying on this site is going to have to drive their vehicles, because there's not a route to get into the site, which means there's going to be more use of the roads, etc., etc., etc. So I struggle to understand why that was a problem, but I'm sure we will hear that. It's not a reason for not approving this, I totally get it, but it's a shame that it was removed. My question relates to, on the day when we visited the site, there was a discussion of trees, and I know you've just highlighted. The trees that are being removed, are any of them mature trees? And if they are mature trees, the ones that are replacing them, are they going to be put in as young trees, or are they going to put in medium mature trees? How are the ones that are replacing them being replaced? Thank you.
So yeah, the image on the right-hand side is one of the trees that was in question. So this tree is going to be removed as part of the proposal. It's a hornbourne. It is a classified B rated tree. However, the arboricultural report set out that it's constrained where it is, and the tree actually can't fully grow where it is, and for that reason it's most appropriate to be removed. The arboricultural officer has raised no objection to removing this tree.
I think while the case officer just looks into that, I was just going to come back on the student accommodation. So it's because it's in the 400 metre buffer zone. So Natural England didn't deem it acceptable use because it's student accommodation and therefore residential development.
While we're waiting for that, can I come back? So is the expectation there's a problem because the students might bring dogs or cats in?
Yes, and in of themselves present a risk of recreational disturbance.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of the replacement tree planted, there'll be 44 new trees planted on site. However, there is a landscaping condition that would then secure the size that they'd be needed to be required.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Noel Kang.
It was actually a related question to Sean's student accommodation. Obviously, there's no student accommodation, but when will this actual site be used as to when would it be just like 8 to 6 or something like that, or are there going to be evening use by the students themselves? Are there going to be possibly events or anything like that which are going to be carried on the site?
So the student educational purpose of the site would be between normal working hours. However, there is community use on the site, which is ancillary to the wider Gordon Murray site. So there could be community uses in the evening.
Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you. A couple of points, really. I think it's a real shame the building wasn't listed, because I think we're losing a very iconic building that certainly for most of my life I have welcomed the view of as I go down the M3. But we are where we are, and the reasons for not investing in it are commercially understood. I am concerned about the additional traffic movements as a result of this application. And I'm surprised that there's nothing within this application around students' passage to and from the university. There's not a great deal of accommodation around, although if we believe everything we're led to believe about the popularity of care homes in the press at the moment. It could be that maybe with a change in conditions, the care home just down the road could be used. There is no public transport in this site, and I would expect to see a condition around a bus service or something similar, either to Woking or to Sunningdale, because there's no student accommodation either. The nearest student accommodation is likely to be in Egham. So I just wonder if there's anything that could be worked through with the applicant in that regard, and just to have an understanding as to why it was deemed that that would not be a reasonable consideration.
So in terms of the traffic movements, when the student accommodation was removed, an updated transport assessment was submitted, which Highways reviewed, and they haven't raised any objection. Condition 11 does require the applicant to submit a travel plan for the staff and student visitors. And in terms of putting on additional public transport, it wouldn't be reasonable in this case to request this.
If I can just come back, I appreciate that none of us are surprised that Highways raised no objection. We've got a school to one side, and again, if we could just be mindful of the construction traffic, that they don't and are prevented from using Hyams Lane, and also ideally prevented from going through the middle of Windlesham, which does present a problem because you can't actually get to that site without either going down Hyams Lane or through the middle of Windlesham, or over a bridge which has got a restriction. So they'd have to come in and go out the same way in relation to that. We are looking at a minimum of 400 movements a day, plus staff and lecturers, presumably, because 200 students, they've got to come, they've got to leave. And as I said, there's no public transport. Even if they were to get together, we're still looking at 100 movements a day. 50 movements a day if 4 of them shared a car. So I'm not surprised that we heard nothing back from Highways, but I continue to be eternally disappointed by that. But I'm sure the e-bike charging will compensate for all of that, because anyone sensible is going to go down our roads with an e-bike.
So at condition 7, you have got that they'll be required to submit a construction management plan, so those details will be submitted. And then it is also just worth noting that the transport plan has been assessed against the existing use. So the existing use of the building as the office would have generated a high level of movement as well. So that's part of the assessment that's been considered, is the comparison between the two.
Members, do you have any other questions? Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, it's just going back to the point that Councillor Garrett raised at the start about the student accommodation being removed. So the applicant has removed that. They're not asking us to approve any student accommodation here because it couldn't happen here. It would be refused because of the harm that it would cause to the SPA by people walking on it. And there are alternatives, as we've heard. People could drive in from outside, and that would remove the harm. So that's why there's no accommodation possible on this site, and that's why the applicant has chosen to remove it, I would imagine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Garrett, then Councillor Wheeler.
Just picking up on the traffic point, when I went to the site visit on whatever evening it was, Tuesday, I had to queue at whatever time it was we were trying to get there to get up the road, and it was, sorry?
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock, there we go. So at 5 o'clock I had to queue for quite a long time in the priority road, and that's without all the traffic that's going to be coming and going from the site when the university opens. So whilst I have the same frustration as we all have in this chamber about Highways never having an issue, if they actually sat there and looked at the time, then they would see there is an increase in traffic. The traffic is already busy, so there will be an increase in traffic because there will be more cars, because there will be no accommodation on site because people will be travelling in. Just a point, reference to traffic. Thank you.
Noted. Councillor Wheeler.
I would also like to point out that although the students can't sleep there, They can stay there late and they can access the common. So actually not having the accommodation in this case doesn't necessarily make any difference whatsoever to the impact on the SPA or the common, because nobody is preventing them from leaving the campus to access it. However, very fortuitously, there is a wonderful Sangs, which is within easy pavement walking distance of the site. So maybe they will choose to do that instead. But not living there won't make any difference whatsoever to them accessing the site, potentially. So, yeah, strange argument.
I just thought it'd be helpful to come in there. I fully appreciate your point and your view, but it's really important for me to stress that this council has signed up to the Joint Strategic Partnership Board since 2009, in which the principle of student accommodation, amongst others, has been identified as likely to have a significant effect. And that runs through to our SPD, which is 2019, again, which the council endorsed, and into our local plan, which the council endorsed. It's just really important that I stress that, because I appreciate the frustrations, I appreciate that there might be perceived inconsistencies, but it's a framework that we have signed up to as an organisation, and it's a legal framework on which we must base our decision. So I just wanted to come in there. Thank you.
Councillor Hough.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondering again around the sort of the transport and the travel. So looking at the report, saying that about 85 students plus 12 staff, so let's say sort of around 100 people would be occupying that building at any one time. I just wondered how that would compare to its previous use when it was being used by BOC, because I know there's a underground car park as part of that building, which is currently full of very nice cars, I hear. But how many cars would previously have made those daily trips compared to what's being proposed as part of this plan?
So the transport statement set out that the proposal would result in fewer vehicle movements than the previous office use, equating to a reduction in 16 two-way vehicle movements in the AM and a reduction of 52 two-way vehicle movements in the PM. So compared to the existing use, there'd be a reduction in vehicle movements.
Members, do you have any other questions? Okay, the officer's proposal is to grant. Could I have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Garrett, Councillor Hough. I'll leave it to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. So the officer's recommendation is to grant, subject to conditions and a legal agreement. All those for, please raise your hands.
That's unanimous.
That's unanimous.
Two 51264 has been granted, subject to conditions and legal agreement. Item 4 is in relation to the planning application 280828, land to the west of Church Road, West End. I'd like to remind the committee that we are not here to revisit all the planning merits of the original application, including, for example, highway matters, as this debate was undertaken at the committee in May 2024. Rather, we are here to consider the requirements of the habitats regulation and the content and conclusions of the appropriate assessment. The officer's recommendation is to A, agree the contents of the appropriate assessment and conclude that development is likely to have a significant effect upon the integrity of the SPA. B, to refuse planning application. I request that any questions raised after the officer's presentation are in this capacity. Ms. Turney?
There are updates on this application, which includes a summary note from the applicant's ecologist. It's considered this raised no new information and all the content is covered within the AA and the case officer's report. For complete list, 2 additional annexes from the original committee report were also uploaded. The application was presented to members in May 2024 for the erection of 6 one-bedroom almshouse units with gardens, including a new access from Church Road, parking areas and a bin store. The officer recommendation was to refuse the planning application. However, this was overturned by members of the committee, and the resolution was to approve the application subject to agreement of the conditions to be agreed with the Chair, Vice Chair and the Ward Councillors, and a legal agreement. As there was an officer recommendation to refuse the planning application, officers had not carried out the appropriate assessment, which in turn was not presented to members of the committee back in May 2024. Following the committee resolution to grant, officers discussed that the appropriate assessment had not been carried out and presented. External legal advice was sought in relation to the planning decision, was issued in line with the members' resolution to grant, would the decision comply with the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulation 2017. The legal advice considered it essential that an appropriate assessment to be carried out in order to comply with the legislation and to avoid a breach. Otherwise, the decision made by the Planning Committee would be unlawful and therefore open to legal challenge. The purpose of tonight's presentation is not to consider the merits of the original decision for example, highway impacts or greenbelt. However, for members to solely review the content and conclusion of the appropriate assessment and determine whether the proposal would have an adverse effect on the integrity of the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area under the Conservation Habitats and Species Regulation 2017, and as a consequence to refuse the planning application. The Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area was designated in March 2005 and is afforded high level of protection under the Habitats Regulation. How the Special Protection Area impacts development within Surrey Heath. The national legislation that underpins the Special Protection Area seeks to ensure that any proposed development scheme or plan will not adversely affect the integrity of the SPA. Natural England is the government agency that champions the conservation of wildlife throughout England. They have advised all local planning authorities with land within the Thames Basin Heath that new housing within 5 kilometres of the SPA may harm the rare bird population, and particular harm may occur from additional housing development that lies within 400 metres of the SPA. This harm can be caused by disturbance to the birds from increased walkers, cats and dogs visiting the heathland and other recreational uses associated with additional housing. To ensure residential development within 400 metres to 5 kilometres of the SPA, while ensuring its protection, the Council, alongside neighbouring authorities, have implemented a range of mitigation measures. These measures have been agreed with Natural England and have been in place for some time. The mitigation measures include the provision of suitable alternative green space and the strategic management and monitoring. Development within 400 metres of the SPA. There's establishment of a 400-metre buffer around the SPA, which no new net residential development will be permitted. These measures have also been agreed within the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area Avoidance Strategy, SPD, agreed in March 2019, and has also been supported within Policy E2 of the Emerging Local Plan that members supported at examination. In this case, the site lies within the 400-metre buffer, and as a result, the Council, acting as the competent authority, is required to undertake an additional appropriate assessment to determine whether the proposal would have an adverse effect on the integrity of the SPA. So just up on the screen here is the policy that is from the Emerging Local Plan, which clearly sets out that new development will not be permitted within the 400-metre buffer zone. And then again, this is the extract from the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area, which again clearly sets out that new residential development within the 400-metre buffer zone won't be acceptable. So as a reminder to members, the application site is located with the red circle, and the yellow is the 400-metre buffer zone, and then the hashed area is the SPA itself, and the P indicates the parking area. So the AA itself, the first stage is for the screening stage for the likely significant effects. So as mentioned, due to the application site located within the 400-metre buffer of the Thames Basin, SPA, where there is a presumption against development that results in a net increase in residential units, therefore at this stage we cannot rule out likely significant effects. It's therefore necessary to consider stage 2, and an appropriate assessment is required to be agreed with Natural England. So stage 2, the appropriate assessment. To assess the likely significant effect of the proposal in more detail and identify ways to avoid or minimise any effect. The appropriate assessment should assess the likely significant effect of the proposal on the integrity of the site and its conservation objectives. Consider ways to reduce or mitigate any potential for adverse effect on the integrity of the site. To pass the integrity test, the AA must be able to rule out all scientific doubt that the proposal will not have an adverse effect on the integrity of the site. So the proposed mitigation prepared in consultation with the applicant. So the restriction on the occupations of the proposed dwellings, these will be secured through a condition and a legal agreement. There would be no keeping of cats or dogs on the premises at any time, nor shall any visitors bring a cat or dog onto the premises at any time. Again, agreed through a condition and legal agreement. The removal of permitted development rights for the change of use to any other type of C3 use, secured through a condition, and the development hereby approved would only be occupied solely as an almshouse and for no other purpose, again secured through a condition. To enforce this, to enforce the above, there'd be a management plan which can be secured through a condition. So the officer's report and the AA provides detailed information on the proposed mitigation. There remains doubt over the effectiveness of the mitigation put forward, and no additional information has been provided to provide certainty. The provision as currently put forward may stop people who are unable to walk to the SPA, but it doesn't stop them from using the SPA, for example, with a mobility scooter, which gives rise to a concern. In addition, there are significant doubts about the enforceability of the obligations proposed as mitigation, as there is no certainty the council will be able to restrict occupants having pets easily and or how that can be effectively enforced. It's also unclear how visitors bringing cats or dogs to those houses could be controlled. Within the AA and the officer's report, there are appeals and case law of similar examples of mitigation that have not been considered acceptable. No information has been provided to demonstrate that the mitigation measures would prevent adverse harm beyond all scientific doubt. So Natural England were also consulted on the appropriate assessment and have maintained their objection to the development throughout. Natural England considered the proposed mitigation lacks certainty. Even the restricted occupation, residents and visitors could still access the SPA. There are significant concerns about whether the restrictions, particularly relating to pets, could realistically be enforced. Even without pets, Natural England advised that the disturbance from people alone cannot be ruled out, meaning impacts may still occur. Inspectors have consistently rejected similar mitigation approaches, and accepting them here could create wider risk across the SPA. So the officer's recommendation is to refuse the application on the basis that it fails the appropriate assessment under the Habitats Regulation. In reaching this conclusion, full regard has been given to both the applicant's submission and the council's own evidence. The assessment identifies that it is not possible to conclude beyond all scientific doubt that the proposal would not harm the integrity of the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area. Therefore, the officer's recommendation is to agree the contents of the AA and to conclude that the development is likely to have a significant effect upon the integrity of the SPA, and therefore planning permission has to be refused solely on the impact to the SPA. If members decide to go against the officer recommendation, then the following steps need to be followed. The AA would need to be updated to include additional scientific evidence. To pass the integrity test, the AA must be able to rule out all scientific doubt. Natural England would need to comment on the updated AA, and you'd also need to agree the wording to secure any mitigation put forward in a legal agreement. Members should be aware that departing from the officer's recommendation and Natural England's advice carries significant legal risk. If permission is granted where reasonable scientific doubt remains, the decision could be subject to a legal challenge. Planning permission can only lawfully be granted when members are satisfied beyond all scientific doubt that there will be no adverse effect on the integrity of the SPA.
Thank you, Ms Turley. Councillor Pett-Tedder has indicated she would like to speak. Councillor Tedder, can you confirm any interest you may have, please?
Yes, Mr Chairman, I am a trustee of the Chop and Poor allotment, and I am a councillor, and I'm a parish councillor. I don't think there's anything else with regards to this planning application.
Can I ask you one more question? What ward do you represent?
Chobham, Windlesham.
And what ward is this application?
West End.
How did you manage to?
This charity is the ancient parish of Chobham and West End, and therefore this charity serves West End and Chobham.
Thank you. When you're ready, you'll have 8 minutes. It will be timed down by Democratic Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the committee may recall, members resolved in April 2023 committed to defer this application to allow engagement with Natural England. In response, the charity at significant expense undertook this consultation. However, in the charity's view, Natural England did not truly engage as to the real opportunity to mitigate the SPA issue at this specific site. The application was then considered at the May 2024 committee, and members resolved to approve. That resolution was predicted upon specific SPA mitigation measures as detailed in the professionally prepared ecological report submitted alongside the application. Subsequent to the May 2024 committee, and at your office's request, the charity commissioned a comprehensive shadow appropriate assessment prepared by a highly experienced professional ecologist, Adrian Muir of HDA. In this report, the professional outlined a clear package of mitigation measures that will ensure that with certainty that the scheme will not have an adverse impact upon the SPA. This report was submitted in October 2025 and a further summary response issued to the Council this week. I read direct from the report. 3.3, the applicant, Chobham Poor Allotment Charity, has subsequently included measures to exclude risk of any such impacts on the SPA arising either alone or in combination. These include restricting occupancy to those who meet the qualifying criteria and are subsequently unable to use the SPA for informal recreation. Restrictions prohibiting dog ownership that might otherwise increase use of the SPA, for example, through the employment of dog walkers. Restrictions prohibiting cat ownership to avoid predation of ground nesting birds on the SPA. In view of the provision, ongoing ownership and wardening of the almshouses by Chobham Poor Allotment Charity, it will be possible to secure the above measures for the lifetime of the development, therefore eliminating any risk or any such effects. 3.5. Finally, it is noted that the site lies opposite an existing recreation ground and that the proposal commits to the payment of relevant SANG and SAM mitigation measures. Although these measures are not necessary to reach the below conclusion, they are further supplementary relevance to the clear conclusion made in paragraph 3.6. Paragraph 3.6, I consider that through securing the above measures using conditions of planning consent and or restrictive covenants where appropriate, in accordance with section 6 of the attached shadow habitat regulation assessment and appropriate assessment, it can be concluded with certainty that the proposed development of 6 single-bedroom almshouses at Church Road, West End, would not result in any adverse impact on the Thames Base Heathon SPA, either alone or in combination with other plans or projects. Natural England's objection fails to engage with these mitigation measures that will ensure no adverse impact occurs upon the SPA. Further, the charity are in a unique position to ensure these measures are appropriately self-regulated and enforced. It would also reflect that this proposal offers true, positive community benefits. This is an exceptional opportunity to deliver community-led homes at social rent prices on land owned by a charity who control a small fund to construct the development. There is no alternative site available. As you have heard previously, almshouses change lives for the better. Members, you are the decision makers, not Natural England or your officers. Whether the proposed mitigation measures are appropriate is a judgment, not a science. However, the comprehensive and professionally prepared Shadow AA allows you to conclude with certainty that the scheme will not have adverse effects upon the SPA. I therefore urge you to do the following. The members agree with the sound professional view contained within the applicant's Shadow AA and resolve to prepare a positively worded AA that replicates the mitigation measures and content included within the Shadow HRA and AA. Further, that members resolve to grant permission subject to the completion of a legal agreement and planning conditions that are drafted directly in accordance with the documents prepared and submitted by the charity to the Council on the 29th of October 2025, with no further amendment or consultation with Natural England. To do anything different would depart from the positive and sound decision made in May 2024 by this committee, and to be a significant and be it at a significant expense to the borough's residents. Speaking from my heart, being a local councillor and always thinking of our residents, these are very special social housings provided by a charity in perpetuity, never to be sold to a developer or on the open market, but retained by the charity for the people. Let Surrey Heath go out in a blaze of glory, showing they were wise enough, cared enough, thoughtful enough to allow a charity to provide these houses for the benefit of those in need in the ancient parish of Chobham in perpetuity. And just one final comment. It's correct that you do need an appropriate assessment, but it is incorrect that the AA must be agreed by Natural England. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Tedder. Before I pass this out to the committee, I've got a question to ask. Call-ins are by the ward councillor, the vice chair of planning, or the chair of planning. Am I wrong?
You are correct, but I do think there's no merit in going over previous process. I think we should probably focus on what's at hand, because we wouldn't be able to resolve it in this meeting. That would be something that should be put to the monitoring officer.
I understand it's a moot point at this stage, but I was just wondering why it managed to get this far.
It would be...
There's 3 ward councillors in Bisley and West End. One of them could have been persuaded, I'm sure.
I appreciate your point, but I think it's a question for the monitoring officer. But thank you.
Members, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Can I ask Councillor Tedder, did you have any legal or other specialist advice in writing that speech?
Yes?
And how was that funded?
How was it funded?
Did you pay for it yourself, or did someone else pay for it?
No, I didn't pay for it myself.
Sorry to jump in. I appreciate the point you're raising, but it's not relevant to the committee. I think it would be, again, a question to raise with the monitoring officer if you believe there's an issue there, but it's not something for the purposes of this meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Members? Councillor Garrett?
I know we usually get to ask the Speaker, and I know that's different for councillors, so I actually just want to ask the Speaker a few questions. So, and am I allowed to do that, having said that? Because I'm conscious that we might not be able to. So are we allowed to do that?
Just going to clarify that
Cool.
for you.
Thank you.
Additional questions from non-committee councillors would not normally be accepted by committee or officers unless the chair allows it for special specific clarification points.
It's fine, I can ask everybody else, it's fine.
Okay.
I've got a long list, so I'll start at the beginning as I have the floor, shall I?
Thank you, Councillor.
So the question I was going to ask Councillor Tedder was, and you might have to ask her to answer this, and you're an expert on almshouses, how many almshouses are there in the UK? Now, quick search says there's about 30,000. I don't know if that's correct. That's Google. We can't always trust Google. And so my question was related to that. In those almshouses, how many of those almshouses generally allow cats and dogs? Because a key part of this discussion is around whether there will be a problem because these residents are going to have cats and dogs. That's pretty much the crux of this discussion, from what I can make out. It is pretty much the crux of this discussion, whether they can have cats or dogs. And we discussed at the planning application meeting, when we approved it, that there is a policy that the almshouses have in place which stops residents from having cats and dogs, and that is enforced, I believe, by almshouses as well. Okay, so it does relate completely to this application as it stands, because the issue is around having cats and dogs. Okay, in my humble opinion. There's a lot of other questions I've got, but that for me is one of the key points. So I'd like to understand, of all those other almshouses, how many allow cats and dogs? How many actually give cats and dogs? And how do they police the conversation? And we had that during the planning application meeting. I know we'd had that conversation, but I'd like to get an idea from an expert in the room about how that works. Thank you.
I'm not sure how relevant it is actually to why we're here, which is the appropriate assessment.
I'm happy to answer it. Well, I would say what you're suggesting is actually anecdotal. So it's not actually what we would consider scientific evidence. We have to look at the specific case that's in front of us, and the specific case in front of us is that Natural England do not agree that any measure put forward would limit cat or dog predation because they don't see it as enforceable. So I can see you're looking at a national picture and want to make the comparison, but materially you have to focus on what we've got here. This is a specific site in the 400 metre buffer zone. The onus is to prove why it passes, not why it fails. There isn't a principle against net residential development in the 400 metre buffer zone. So that's a really important point. I think we also need to be very careful not to stray into planning merit. You had the discussion on planning merit. This is not about planning merit. It's about whether it meets a specific legal test, which does not discriminate against use. The AA does not discriminate against use. It would be paragraph 64 of the Habitats and Species Regulations that would. In that situation, you're already looking at derogation. So for the appropriate assessment, the benefits of the use are irrelevant. I know that's really difficult, and I completely appreciate that the use and its benefits, but it's irrelevant to the appropriate assessment.
And it's a follow-up related to the point that was made about the assessment not being carried out because the recommendation was refused. Have we changed that policy since? Because there is an element that says we're assuming that if you suggest we refuse it, we have to refuse it, which is not the part of this committee, is it? We're here to decide based on the merits. So if that's the case, moving forward, should assessments be done whether you suggest to refuse it or not?
So there are two options available to PAC tonight. The first is that you agree with our recommendation. The second is that you don't and you take away and do an AA. So there are options available. We've got a very specific situation here, a very specific legal test. So it's very different to what you have dealt with before. But
My question wasn't specifically about this. It's actually moving forward, whilst we're still Surrey Heath. If in future you're going to refuse something, are you also going to do the relevant assessments? Because the problem here is you didn't do an assessment because you were going to suggest to refuse it. And the reason we find ourselves in the situation we do now is because the assessment wasn't done. So moving forward, will we do those assessments even if the officer's recommendation is to refuse?
That's a very fair point, and I think obviously there was a process that could have been followed more clearly, and I can definitely take that forward. Yeah, I fully appreciate the point.
Councillor Garrett, do you have any more questions? Councillor Wheeler, you're next.
Thank you. I have more questions than the questions I'm going to go through at this point. So I think it's really useful for all of us in the committee, and I know that some of the committee members have changed because we have people that sub and people that don't sub. And I'm sure all of us this afternoon looked at the email that came in from the leader about poverty within our borough. All of this is, there is no absolute, and there cannot be any absolute scientific evidence. Natural England previously raised no objection to a hotel with 10 new bedrooms or an elderly care home within the same SPA. I wondered if officers could explain on the evidence why these uses did not adversely affect the SPA integrity, but 6 mobility limited almshouses residents will. That's point 1. The other point is what specific mitigation was required for the hotel and the care home that is absent here. In fact, with this application, we have a lot more mitigation which we can enforce because, as has already been explained several times, these are charitable houses with a different tenancy agreement to a private letting agreement. It's totally different. And if there is none, how can Natural England's objection scientifically, which is the phrase that's being bandied about, be used? The other thing is the site-specific evidence that the AA demonstrates that there will be actual harm, not theoretical risk. And from these particular residents on this particular site, I see no mention in that AA around the main road that separates these residents from the heath. There's no reference to it. It's as if it doesn't exist. They have been fine with mobility scooters at other locations, but not at this location. The way in which this site, for those of you that don't remember, the way in which the exit of the site goes, the residents would come out, cross a fairly unused road, and they have a recreation ground right in front of them. It's a massive green heath. No sane person with mobility issues would cross the main road, but there is no reference to that main road in this assessment. You're talking about residential development, and the term residential development and new housing has been bandied about throughout this application. There are other places in statute, and I know that when we had an unusual briefing by a legal advisor earlier this week, there was no reference. They gave us case studies where precedent had been used, but they didn't mention the Natural England accepted the HRA for 16 almshouses apartments in Winchester. And so I don't understand how 6 almshouses in West End can really be seen as materially different. At Winchester, Natural England approved a full habitats regular assessment for those 16 almshouses. They've not fully explained why 6 bungalows in West End, poor people with mobility, with tenancy restrictions, can come out with a different outcome. So whatever happens at the result of this evening, there's going to be a legal challenge, whether it's from the almshouses or whether potentially it's from Natural England. Natural England, who have not objected to a hotel, not objected to old people's care home, who will have very similar residents, and our care homes within Surrey, very many of them are pet friendly, have not brought into consideration the main A road that separates this development from the almshouses. I don't see, upon challenge, that their AA can really stand.
I think there's quite a few points I can come back on, but please do tell me if I've not covered them, and I will revisit them. So you mentioned the poverty, and I know that was more of a statement, but again, I have to go back to that's not material to the AA. It's not an assessment of the benefit of the scheme. You mentioned no objection around hotels and C2 uses. there is a clear distinction in not only Natural England's approach, but in Surrey Heath policy to those different uses. Our SPD is very clear that C1 hotels are treated differently, that C2, it depends on the nature of the use, and C3 is at the outset considered likely to have significant effects. This is C3. It's not enough to compare different applications of different uses that have different material considerations, and ultimately Natural England did not object to that C2 use that is referenced. They are objecting here, and we need to give that significant weight as part of the appropriate assessment process. There are reasons why C2 might be treated differently. They tend to be self-contained. They tend to be for where all the services for those individuals are provided within that building. It's very rare that those individuals would leave those buildings, but they're still principles that this council signed up to as part of the Joint Strategic Partnership Board in 2009, which has been in place for 17 years, and to date has not been questioned by this council. It is in our SPD quite clearly, again, which was endorsed by this council, and it was in our local plan. So I appreciate that we may not necessarily agree with Natural England, but we need to give significant weight to that as part of this assessment, and to go a different route without giving scientific evidenced reasons, because the burden of proof is on saying it passes, not if it fails, then we would be at serious risk of a legal challenge. So I would much prefer to put forward a case of a legal challenge against the decision to refuse the application based on the AA than I would in the alternative, because case law is quite clear on that. And it could be Natural England, but there is other bodies that could judicially review this. It's not limited to Natural England. So there are a number of other bodies that have, in the past, for example, the RSPB, they have raised cases. I think you raised a case in Winchester, but the Winchester is not in the Thames Basin Special Protection Area, nor in the SAC. Again, there's a risk with AAs and HRAs that we try and suggest we're comparing apples with apples, but we're comparing apples with pears here. They're specific applications with specific considerations, and you need to consider what is at hand for this application. You reference recreation ground nearby, and I know that's been referenced in other cases. It's not a SANG, and if you're in the 400-metre buffer zone, SANG and SAM are not appropriate in any event, because in recognising that as a mitigation, you're recognising there's a recreational impact. So SANG and SAM are for beyond the 400-metre buffer zone. They're not for within the 400-metre buffer zone. A recreation ground does not represent mitigation and cannot be considered as mitigation. I think you referenced the road. We would have had many, many appeals if a road being cited in the 400-metre buffer zone was an issue. It is not referenced in the Joint Strategic Partnership Board's papers or our own. It is specific about a 400-metre buffer zone, which is as the crow flies from the border of the from the SPA. So I think it's completely reasonable, especially given there is a crossing there as well, that that's not considered as part of the appropriate assessment, because there's no case where that's been demonstrated, and even if you were to take that view, you'd need scientific evidence to show why that would be a barrier, which we do not have. I feel like I've not covered all the points, so I'm just going to quickly check my notes. You might have to remind me on the
last one.
Thank you. The other part related to the fact that we are viewing this as a residential development, when in fact, I would say that it meets the AROPI grounds in terms of the fact that it is there is a benefit from a social point of view. Now, I know when this was discussed previously, that it was saying that it was a major structure or a major infrastructure that could bring that into consideration. However, there is another part in it, and if you need me to find the actual clause, Kieran, I know that your knowledge on this is superb, and the chances are that you will know it and have it at the tip of your tongue. There is an argument within that the social housing and the social housing benefit, particularly given that Chobham West End doesn't have any almshouses. It's one of the few villages at the edge of our borough that doesn't benefit from almshouses. I do feel that we are not giving any weight for that social benefit from this truly, not 10% off market rate or anything else. These are needs assessed. What I can afford to pay, I am asked to pay. Housing is not being considered.
So in terms of the use class, it is submitted as C3. The application is for a C3. It's not for a care home use, it is for a C3, and we need to apply those tests.
Social housing.
Social housing is C3. There are many regeneration opportunities that have been stunted by Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area and broader sites across the UK. It's really important that I stress that if we are going down paragraph 664 of the Habitats and Species Regulation, which is derogation, there is an acceptance that it's failed the appropriate assessment. So we just need to be clear that that is after you've gone past that test. And I did wonder if that was going to come up tonight. So I did think it would be useful to raise some examples of where IROPI has been considered, including for housing-related development. I think the most relevant for today would be the Portsmouth local plan, which specifically identified a significant allocation for employment and housing development with significant social benefits because it provided large areas of social housing within it. It did not meet IROPI. It was not considered by the Secretary of State to meet that test. That is very significant, and before you even get to IROPI, you must first consider alternatives. And this is probably a very frustrating part of the HOA process. I will say that up front. But an alternative doesn't mean that the landowner does not own an alternative site to provide it. It means that alternative land is not available to provide that use. It doesn't matter how costly or difficult that process is, there represents an alternative. If that were the case, we would have seen sites like this or affordable housing sites which do have a significant social benefit. I don't dispute that in any way, but that's not part of the test here. They would have already gone through the process. We know in Surrey Heath that there are restrictions. If you take the Old Dean, for example, regeneration opportunities there have been limited by the fact that it's predominantly in the 400 metre buffer zone. And that means that when we look at the local plan process, we have to immediately treat that as an absolute constraint, and it stunts that development. And I know it's very difficult because there are clear reasons why you would want a development like this to come forward, but that's not the test you're looking at here. It's, does it meet the appropriate assessment? Officers' view is it clearly does not. And the evidence of proof would be to prove that it does if felt that wasn't the case.
If I can just come forward, it's not social housing, it's charitable housing at an affordable rate. There's a huge difference.
The same would apply within the Habitats and Species Regulations.
Councillor Quinn.
Thank you. I'm wondering if the officers can help me understand whether the appropriate assessment has assessed the proposed mitigation options cumulatively, or whether it's just considered them separately. So for me, looking at it, obviously we've got the first mitigation about occupation and limiting that to those who are physically frail, have mobility issues. And then I note that obviously Natural England are not happy that separately the no keeping of cats or dogs mitigation could be enforced. But surely these things need to be looked together in that with a number of physically frail residents, they are less likely to own dogs and cats that potentially are going to disrupt the land nearby. They're also potentially more likely to be individuals who are widowed, who are single, who don't necessarily have lots of family visiting them, can't rely on family networks to provide accommodation, and therefore they're in an almshouse. So could you just explain how these things, whether they've been considered cumulatively in terms of both of the mitigations? Thank you.
So yes, it's just the nature of the document is that you take it mitigation by mitigation because we need to assess them individually. But even in that case, if it were not to meet one of the different tests, so you could say it may be. We don't believe it does. Natural England don't believe it does. That the mitigation for cat and dog predation is enforceable, for example. But just if you were of the view it met that test, it would still need to meet the recreational disturbance test. And ultimately, Natural England do not consider that they meet the tests, either alone or in combination. And they identify that there's a potential in combination effect of approving such developments because of the impact it might have elsewhere in the Thames Basin Special Protection Area region. So the short answer is yes, but I'm not giving very short answers today. So that I hope that clarifies it.
Yeah, that's helpful. Sorry, can I follow up, Chair? Yeah, I'm just interested in where, especially, that is addressed or referenced, the fact that both of these things have been considered collectively together. I wonder if you can point me to that either in the appropriate assessment or Natural England's response about whether it makes clear that they've considered both of these mitigations cumulatively rather than separately. Thank you.
So the appropriate assessment should be read as one. So in of itself, it's a cumulative assessment. It's just by its nature, if you're discussing individual mitigation measures, for clarity, it makes sense to go through each individually, but that does not then suggest they've not been considered cumulatively. And there is a summary conclusion that outlines how the assessment's been conducted and the conclusions.
Thank you.
Members, do we have any other questions of the officer? Councillor Noble Kang.
Thank you, Chair. Can I remind the committee that the Special Protection Area is one of the South East's most important natural assets with a low land, supporting important populations, as you know, Dartford warbler, nightjar, woodlark, all of which are vulnerable ground nesting birds. And these, obviously, we all know, are very vulnerable from walkers, dog walkers, and cat predation. Now, reading also, I applaud the applicant for providing social housing, etc. But the restriction of cats on the site is understandable, but prohibiting small dogs would be somewhat cruel, as pets are critical to some elderly people's mental health, alleviation of loneliness and company. So the two don't match up. So it is the fact that doesn't matter what you do, cats and dogs are the issue here. And therefore, I somewhat would not be happy to support this application.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Would it be true to say this is not the kind of decision that we normally make at the Planning Applications Committee? We normally look at the planning balance and we weigh up the pros and cons and decide on that basis whether to approve an application. But in this case, we're looking at a technical scientific report that's been prepared. It has to be prepared thoroughly. And to sort of just make assertions to say that it's not true is not, the way you can rebut a scientific report. You need scientific technical expertise to do it. And if we approve this application after it having failed the AA, the advice is that would be unlawful. But when I remember well, May 24, when we discussed this application without the AA, we weren't told that it could possibly be unlawful. And the cost to the council in finance, but also in reputation, could be huge, and that hasn't been mentioned to us before. So I think this is a different kind of decision we're trying to make here. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. It may not feel like it from the discussion, but this is nearly as black and white as planning can get. It's a legal test, pass or fail, and to pass it, the evidential bar is significantly higher, because you're going against 17 years of principled approach to protection of the Thames Basin Special Protection Area. So it's also not necessarily balanced black and white. The burden of proof is to say why it passes if it doesn't conform with an already agreed mitigation schedule, which this does not. So that is really important that I highlight that. and yes, I think there was another point, but I'm not sure if I answered the...
So, no, just to be absolutely clear, the clear legal advice that we've received and officer advice we've received is that if we approved this with a failed AA, we would be acting unlawfully. Is that correct?
Yes, my professional view is it would be an unlawful decision because you don't have any evidence before you to come to the contrary view. And it's probably worth me just noting, I know the shadow AA has been discussed tonight. That cannot be given material weight in the decision-making process because Surrey Heath Borough Council is the competent authority, not the applicant.
Councillor Wheeler, and then Councillor Whitcroft.
Just a couple of quick questions. First and foremost, if we are going to disregard an AA that is done by an applicant, why do we put them through the expense of doing one? That's just something I think for us to have as a takeaway on this one, because I know it was something that they were asked to do. I'd like you, please, to confirm in very precise, idiot-proof for myself terms, what evidence in the AA demonstrates adverse effect on the SPA integrity. Not likelihood, not precaution, but actual demonstrated harm, just so that the applicant will know exactly what they need to address on appeal. And I would also like to just comment that if this evening we refuse this application on the basis of likely harm, the applicant will no doubt appeal. The inspector will apply the correct legal test, and this council will face cost application. And I'd just like that recorded, please, within the minutes. But if I could please have the precise terms, the evidence in the AA that demonstrates the adverse effect.
So it's really important that I say that that is a misunderstanding of the appropriate assessment process. You're suggesting that we need to say evidentially why it fails. Now, we've done an assessment as to why we don't think it provides sufficient certainty. That's what we've done. But you have to also remember that the assessment that we've done in here is based on 17 years of assessment in the Thames Basin Youth Special Protection Area. So it's not fair to suggest that this isn't an evidence-based decision, because the 400-metre buffer zone in of itself is an evidence-based mitigation that was put forward back in 2009 when it was agreed by the Joint Strategic Partnership Board. It's really important to stress that, because between 2005 and up until those mitigations were agreed, there was an embargo on all net new residential development. That included this use, any affordable housing use, other uses in the C3 category, and any at the time that Natural England considered to fall in that. That literally meant we had a housing delivery in 1 year of zero because of that. It's significant in its test. It's one of the highest legal bars in the regulations in terms of the planning policy. It's above the planning judgment. You mentioned the AA. We did not ask them to do an appropriate assessment. We asked them to provide the evidence to support our appropriate assessment. The two things are very different. I have reviewed the appropriate assessment, and there is no evidence in there. There's no scientific evidence. There's comparisons to C2 uses, and there is consideration of conditions, but I can't suggest that there's anything in there that changes my opinion. We did consider mitigations put forward by the applicant, ones that are reasonable and could potentially be conditioned, are included in the appropriate assessment, but we did not ask for an AA to be done by the applicant. They are not the competent authority. That would not be an appropriate thing to do. And I think...
Yes, I'd just like to come in, Councillor Wheeler, about the comparison being made between the potential for a challenge being brought by the applicant in this matter and a judicial review claim being brought. And I think we need to be a little bit careful also, and this is tying in a little bit with what Mr. Bartlett said about the evidence, and they don't stack up equally in the sense that if the recommendation is approved, per the officer's recommendation, if that is what is decided by the members, you are approving something whereby the officers have gone through a legal framework, a legal principle that needs to be adhered to. And there is advice that has been given by a statutory body who've been consulted and have given their evidence for that. That is one thing. It could be challenged. A judicial review, the applicant could challenge it. But if you ignore and go against the officer's recommendation and essentially disregard Natural England's view, and you don't support scientific evidence, which, as Mr. Bartlett said, it's a very high bar that you have to hit to be able to challenge that. You don't have cogent reasons, you don't have scientific evidence. The risk of a judicial review in that case is higher, because the whole point is you've gone through the process correctly. The recommendations, we can't provide an appropriate assessment which enables this to go ahead. And the courts have said you can give deference to Natural England's opinion. The council can do that because they're the statutory body that you're consulting for the evidence to back up your AA, essentially. So I just want to make the point, whilst they're all being referred to as challenges, they are slightly different. It's an appeal, it's a judicial review. Judicial reviews do tend to be much more costly as well. So I just wanted to clarify that, because they're not exactly comparable in the same way. And certainly the external legal advice we've had is that it would be an uphill battle to challenge a decision which flows with officers' recommendation because of the steps that have been taken. I just wanted to come in and just explain that. Thank you.
Councillor David Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. 2 years ago, I voted against the officer's recommendation, and I don't regret that decision, sitting here now, because I felt at the time that the benefits brought by these 6 almshouses and the benefits that they would bring the individuals living in those almshouses outweighed the reasons put forward at that time. I also happen to believe that the idea of 6 people living in almshouses are going to threaten the sang to a huge degree is a pretty ludicrous concept. Sadly, I'm not a scientific expert, nor am I a legal expert, and I have to accept the fact that the principle of SPAs and the resultant set of mitigating circumstances that surround them are a legal matter. And there's quite a few laws I don't agree with, and this is one of them. But at the time, 2 years ago, as we already heard, there was no AA presented in such stark terms as we have before us this evening. What we do have, apparently, is what expert planners and legal advisors consider to be an inadequate AA. And that's a bit unfortunate, really, because from the point of view of the potential residents of the almshouses, because the advice stacked against those almshouses, if you like, if you want to put it in those terms, is enormous, insofar as Natural England oppose the AA. And as I say, I don't necessarily agree with the reasons they put forward, but that's not my problem, because I'm not judged to be qualified to make that assessment. So we just have to put up with that. And again, I'm not a great fan of Natural England for all sorts of reasons, but that's not what's up for debate here tonight. The council's own legal duties, and I personally am satisfied at the level of effort, if you like, which has gone in to establish the legal position, along with a great string of case precedents which have been presented during the course of this week, and we even got 2 more this afternoon. And all of them say the same thing. It therefore seems clear to me that the council, much as we might want to, cannot legally approve the scheme involving these almshouses, because the AA, in the judgment of all these experts, simply does not reach the required standard of certainty. And one can discuss the other issues, as some people have, and they're all very relevant, in my opinion, because the objective of providing supported housing for 6 people in Chobham is obviously a laudable one. But it seems to me that after what I've said, all other planning considerations reluctantly have to be set to one side. So I've been persuaded by the arguments, and I had some hope, I suppose, coming here this evening, that maybe we were going to be presented with, I don't know, 3 PhDs or master's degree people who were going to say, no, this is all wrong, and the council can quite justifiably go against what Natural England has said. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So I'm going to shut up now. Thank you.
I just wanted to come back, and I fully appreciate at the meeting back in May 2024 this wasn't raised. So I fully appreciate that didn't consider this, and that is not on the members in any way. So I fully appreciate that. And I just thought it'd be helpful to put in context scale here, because we have sort of been discussing it's only 6 units. So I completely appreciate it can seem perverse, but it is the framework under which we're working. But I thought it'd be helpful to bring a correlation to the local plan, because that is supported by an appropriate assessment and a significant evidence base that justify why that passes. And just to give you an idea of scale, when we did the transport assessment and the air quality assessment that then came of that, there was a de minimis impact, and we still had to justify to Natural England with additional evidence as to why that would not have a likely significant impact on the SPA. We're talking individual trip movements for the local plan. So we are talking minute scale. You could have a subdivision of a 3-bed house into a 2-bedroom dwelling with a bedsit. If it's in the 400-metre buffer zone, it won't be permissible. The scale is very limited. The test is very low for likely significant effects, and the test to disprove it in the 400-metre buffer zone is very high. So I just thought scale might be helpful, because I appreciate that it probably can feel very perverse and strange at times.
Councillor Ripcroft, want to finish that up?
Yeah, if I could just come back very briefly. I fully accept the amount of effort that's been put into this. I don't dwell on the meeting two years ago, because water under the bridge, and there's no point in banging on about that. I do accept the point you make about the local plan and the support and so on and so forth. But from my perspective, where I think SPAs and the supporting mitigation surrounding them are pretty ludicrous, then it would be much better, particularly in this case, if there was no SPA at all, because we could just get on and make some sensible decisions about providing service for people in Chobham in this instance.
I fully appreciate the planning system can be very frustrating.
Councillor Garrett, Councillor Quinn next.
Just 2 short, very small points. It's a question. Firstly, it's disappointing it's taken 2 years. I'd really like just to understand why it's taken 2 years, just so we get an idea of that. And then the last point is, we often discuss in this chamber professional bodies and the fact we have to take their reports and we question those reports and it's frustrating, etc., etc. And I asked a question of the legal advisor we spoke to on the briefing about black and white. And I'd just like to understand if the professional report from Natural England is black, under what circumstances could we get a white? So basically, if we always take without question what Natural England say, is that the case? Or is there ever any occasion where we can question what they're saying and come back with it? Because it looks like whatever they say goes and we cannot ever question it. That's the feeling I'm getting, and I just want to get a feel for if that's the case. Thank you.
I'll just come in on the time frame. So I think the length of time it's taken shows how complex the issue is to start with. It allowed the applicant time to gather some further evidence to submit to us, for us to review, and there's been a lot of backwards and forward. But again, as we've mentioned, they're a charity, so again we have to keep waiting for their board meetings for them to agree to discuss that and come back to us. Again, the legal team have gone backwards and forward trying to agree a legal agreement that sat alongside the appropriate assessment. So I can appreciate it has been a long time, but there's been lengthy negotiations as well.
Councillor Quinn?
So I was just
sorry.
come back. Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say there has been part delays on our part, but as Melissa said, it's a complex issue. And I think the legal test is quite significant. So I do appreciate it. 2 years feels like a very long time, but it doesn't mean that there hasn't been things going on during that period. Your point on black and white, so we do need to separate how we make a planning judgment based on a statutory consultee, which you're very used to, and we'll have some frustrations with certain bodies as well, which I fully appreciate. This is a slightly different test because it's a legal test, and they are the expert body as defined in the regulations. That's just simply the case. And the whole mitigation in Thames Basin Heaths is based on their agreeing to it back as part of the Joint Strategic Partnership Board. And when we talk about black and white, the black is, in legal terms, the safe zone, because it's the precautionary principle. So there's as Sarah was saying earlier, there's instantly a difference in the balance of that assessment. To prove white, you would need clear scientific evidence that as the decision maker, you could rely upon as a cogent reason for making that decision. So we did obviously go to Natural England with the conditions and suggestions, but they would likely need evidential basis, some actual research to say why that specific condition would work. It has been tested elsewhere, and cat predation by limiting cats has not been successful in other cases. And the evidence in those cases, if I'm honest, was more significant in what was provided. And I appreciate different size scale scheme, that's not a comment on the applicant. But the evidence for white is up here, and the evidence for black is here.
Councillor Quinn?
Thank you. Just kind of a few comments to add, really. I'm just wondering, what is the point in this legal test when I look at this case, I can't think of a case where the risk to the SPA can be more ludicrous or fanciful, really. It's very difficult to conceive of one. So I'm wondering, this whole test seems to be redundant because there never seems to be an example where you could rule out any scientific reasonable doubt that there's going to be any risk. And therefore, I think the question can't be, can we invent any imaginary possible scenario in which someone might one day use the SPA? I think we should be asking a more reasonable question, looking at the whole package of measures. Obviously, evidence-based integrity of the SPA, rather than kind of the ridiculous fanciful risk that we're looking at the moment. I think the residual risk is extremely small. It's small because there's only 6 units. It's small because the residents are not general occupiers. They're frail and mobility impaired residents. it's more because cats and dogs can be prohibited. And I think there's this can be distinguished from one of the cases that is referenced in the report to do with the caravan site, in the fact that the charity and almshouses particular development have particular controls over their tenancy to a much greater extent. So yeah, I can't really see what is the point in this test at all, really. That's my view.
So whether we agree with the principles or not, it is a legal test in planning law that we must satisfy. And there is a clear basis, and I don't mean to repeat it, but it is one that the council is signed up to. We have endorsed the Joint Strategic Partnership Board in 2009 and applied it since. We wrote and endorsed it, I think executive or council, the Thames Basin East Special Protection Area, SPD, and we endorsed the local plan that embeds these principles. So I think it would be unfair of me to suggest this is just Natural England. This is local policy as well. It may not have the same weight in the appropriate assessment. The legal test is based on Natural England, but these are all principles that the council has applied on a weekly basis for 17 years and to date has not been questioned, internally at least. It's really important I stress that, because whether you agree with the principles, the mitigation, that is the legal framework under which we're operating and must make our decision on. We can't make decisions on personal feelings of what the mitigation measures are, as much as we may disagree. I just really need to stress that point.
Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Kieran. And I feel so sorry for you this evening, because I know you, and I know how frustrating the messages that you are giving to us must be. And I thank you for your concise and, as always, considered responses. My understanding, however, is that we can not agree. And if we feel that the mitigation that is laid out is actually sufficient mitigation, and it goes to that legal test, we've got a way forward. The other thing as well that I'd just like us all to bear in mind is if one of those almshouses became a warden occupancy, given the shared nature of the grounds around the almshouses, I'm assuming the classification would go from C3, between C2 and C3, because it would be a warden-led care home. So the whole, maybe it's time for this to be tested, because actually I think all of us that are sitting here this evening feel that the fact that we can't take into consideration the mitigation that's being put forward, or we're being advised that we can't take into consideration the mitigation, that Natural England will approve a care home and they'll approve a hotel, 10 bedrooms in a hotel, 10 bedrooms, not 6 almshouses, 10 bedrooms in a hotel, the other side of the road, directly adjacent to the Thames Heath. This is right on the edge of the SPA, 200 feet further forward, and might I suggest that, pick it up, lift it. I think if you put it where the current allotments are, you'd be all right, you'd be outside. So let's, maybe if all else fails, they'll lift and drop the application. It's nuts, so maybe it's time for it to be tested. But thank you so much, and thank you very much for the officers for the time and everything else. This is really uncomfortable for everyone.
I fully appreciate it's uncomfortable. It's not a recommendation I would like to be putting to members. It's just not. I don't think anyone wants to be here, and I fully appreciate the use and its benefits. It's just the nature of the test I've already outlined, that is not a factor. And I know you suggested there's an alternative there, but I must stress that if you were to just simply change the conclusion of the AA, the decision would be unlawful. In my professional view, it'd be unlawful and highly vulnerable to legal challenge. So we could also have a situation where you take that route, and if it is JR'd, it could still not come forward because that may be quashed in the courts. But we have seen other cases tested. This is a principle that many other authorities, not just Natural England, are signed up to. It's a principle that many non-statutory bodies, like the RSPB, are fully supportive of. It's a flagship mitigation for natural sites. So I wouldn't underestimate the way this would be seen elsewhere and who might consider a judicial review. And that's, I'm just putting that as a sort of more advice. And again, I know you're referencing care homes and I completely appreciate why, but we can't compare apples with pears. And in this test and in Natural England's view, there is a clear material difference and we need to take that into account quite clearly. One thing I haven't picked up on is I know that there has been reference to a legal briefing that happened on Monday. I think we were very clear at that meeting, it's about the process, it's not to discuss a specific application. But as you probably can appreciate from this meeting, it's a very complex technical issue. So we just wanted to give that as an opportunity to members. I'm very happy to know it happened. I'm fully transparent on that. It's to support members in the understanding of the process. It wasn't to discuss the application.
Councillor Helen Whitcroft.
Thank you. I would just like to echo, and I think from Councillor Wheeler was saying a minute ago, that whatever decision we come to tonight, I think I'm probably right in saying, and you can feel the atmosphere in the room, that people will vote with very heavy hearts. I think there's, you know, it says, Mr. Bartlett was saying, none of us really want to be here, and I think it's probably, having heard all I have heard, and I would like to just touch very briefly on the briefing on Monday evening. There were comments made by other members at the time that it was incredibly frustrating to go to a briefing like that and not be able to discuss the relevance of the legal guidance we were being provided to the particular case that we were talking about. And that in fact it was emphasised at the time that that's what that was, and that the individual application couldn't be discussed, and that was met with a lot of frustration. And I actually wrote an email to Mr. Bartlett afterwards, making it very clear that that's how I felt about it. That in fact, in some ways, the briefing and having those legal points pointed out as they were at the time was actually more of a frustration than coming here and simply hearing it as we have tonight. As I've said, having looked through it, there is case law upon case law, and I do have a general legal background, and you know, no, you can't argue the case law that's been pointed out both in the documentation tonight and on Monday night at the briefing. I don't feel as if I have any choice other than to support the officer's recommendation on this, but as I've already said, I do so with an incredibly heavy heart. Thank you.
Councillor White.
On numerous occasions this evening and on Monday night when we had the presentation or the legal advice, we've been told that we should not and cannot go against this recommendation for whatever reasons. Case law, in my opinion, is always there to be checked or to be challenged. But my question is, why are we here as a committee if we're constantly being told we can't do anything?
So this isn't a delegated decision because it was called in originally. So that's why it's here. But I do appreciate that's put all members in a very difficult position. I do appreciate that. The case law point, I think it's quite clearly. So can you just repeat that again? Because I want to make sure I give you a proper answer.
No, all I said was that, in my opinion, and on past information, that case law is always up to be challenged. It's there to be challenged.
Thank you. I've actually remembered. Sorry. So you can go against Natural England's advice, but you would need cogent scientific reasons to do so. So you would need to justify why, and very clearly with scientific evidence. And I appreciate that's very difficult to do at this stage. That's why we put the two options there. But we are very I'm very clear that based on the assessment, I see no clear route, and we have done a detailed assessment of this application and mitigation, and there is a very clear steer from Natural England, however difficult that is.
I just want to add something to that and just highlight that at the briefing on Monday, it was said, just to balance out that statement, that why are we here? You are the decision makers. You are the decision makers. And in this case, there is an officer recommendation. You don't have to follow it. You are the decision makers. But because of the nature of what's coming before the committee this evening, and because it's technical in nature, we are, I know, having to say again and again, the high bar that you have to hit to be able to go against that recommendation, disregarding the information, the technical and the scientific information that's fed into the report that has been prepared, the assessment, sorry, that's been prepared by the officers. So I just want to clarify that, because I don't want you to feel that you are here without, you know, the ability to vote freely as you wish to. Of course you can, but it is our job, all of the officers' job, to set out very clearly what is before you and the risks as well if the decision is made to go against the officer's recommendation. So I just wanted to just add that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Quinn.
Thank you. Sorry to speak again, but just talking about case law, it's interesting to look at the extracts in the appropriate assessment on page 8. So you'll see the inspector and appeal reference, I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but it ends in 0162, stated that he cannot be certain that the proposed restriction on keeping dogs would in itself enable me to find that the scheme would have no adverse effect. And that one's interesting, because going back to my question earlier about how these mitigations are considered cumulatively, it seems that a mitigation, just simply a mitigation on its own against dogs is not sufficient. But the inspector there has not said anything about combining that with a mitigation on who could inhabit the property in terms of them being frail, not being mobile. So I'd suggest in terms of that particular decision, that may have limited relevance. There may be a case for distinguishing this one on those grounds. I'd say again, just looking at the next case, 197, 199 Guildford Road, Ash. This is to do with the caravan site, and I think, you know, the inspector was mainly concerned here, it seems, with the fact that things could change in the future, that fences could be removed, that covenants could change. But almshouses have a tradition of going back, many, many decades and remaining as almshouses. They seem to be very fixed in terms of their use. I think that is something that, again, could be used to distinguish and persuade an inspector on those grounds. So I think, there are reasonable grounds to try and distinguish this from some of the cases here, especially the ones that are just looking at restrictions on keeping dogs in and of themselves to do with accommodation that does not have frail individuals living in them. So I'd be interested in the officer's thoughts on that. Thank you.
I think in what has just been described, you're in essence describing the precautionary principle. It identifies there's doubt. That is the precautionary principle. It is to prove against that if you're going to say it passes the AA test. Again, we're using specific cases to help make clear specific reasons. So yes, they are dealt with in isolation, but again, it needs to be read as a whole. And Natural England do not consider that the AA should pass, and they are quite clear on that. So I fully appreciate the points, and I know there's always a risk with case law in terms of interpretation, but these are cases that have made clear that there would be the potential for likely significant effects.
Thank you. Just to follow up, thank you, Chair. So can you confirm that, can the officers confirm that these are the most relevant cases? So there's no cases involving particular armhouses on the scale proposed. So there's no specific cases involved with that. These seem to be cases concerned with adults of any age with no restriction on their mobility, for instance, in terms of when it's talking about pets. So there's no specific case that you can refer me to that talks about no cat or dog covenants when there is a limit on who can occupy the property. Are there any involving that? Thank you.
As far as I'm aware, in this document we do not reference an almshouses case, but again we've got very specific set of circumstances. The reason we reference certain cases is because they are cases that are referenced in case law for these issues. I understand the point on the almshouses, but it's still C3, and we are looking at C3 in these case law situations. So I don't think it changes the assessment if there isn't an example of an almshouses there. I think the assessment's still clear.
Chair, if I could just follow up one more time. But the inspectors do look beyond it just being C3, don't they? They're often referring to the sites based on their individual characteristics. So that would be fair to say, wouldn't it? So they don't just say all C3 is the same, for instance.
It's fair to say, but there's a presumption against C3 in the 400 metre buffer zone, both in local and policy and in Natural England's guidance. There are C2s that would not be permissible in the 400 metre buffer zone, but it depends on the specifics. Natural England do, in their response, make a point about C2, but we are not looking at C2. There are other uses, like HMOs, for example, other uses that do come under the framework, but C3 is quite clearly in our policies and by Natural England referenced as a presumption that it will have a likely significant effect if there's any net new residential development.
Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you. Mine is an extension in some respects to Councillor Quinn's. I just want to come back. The officers are mentioned earlier, the SPD, to refuse this application because obviously this isn't a care home or a hotel, which is deemed to be acceptable within the SPA. I just wonder if I could have clarification, please, on how an almshouse for frail elderly residents that is functionally identical to a care home in terms of its impact on the SPA. Its residents are immobile, they're managed, they're governed by a charitable trust. That if the SPD exempts care homes, and this use is indistinguishable from a care home in its recreational impact, then surely the SPA doesn't support refusal. It must support approval, because it could be seen that officers are selectively relying on the SPD where it helps them and potentially not when it isn't. And just before we come to a decision, I would be grateful just for the clarity for appeal if officers can state precisely, and we can have minuted, what specific harm to the SPA integrity that the appropriate assessment has demonstrated without mitigation, and what specific evidence that conclusion is based on. Thank you. And I promise that's the last time I speak.
So in terms of your first point, there's an inherent assumption that you've applied that C2 is the same as what we're looking at. That is not brought out in evidence, and it does depend on this individual case. It's a C2 care home. As I've mentioned in the past, if Natural England are to consider it acceptable, it tends to be self-contained with predominantly services included in that unit. We're not looking at that here in terms of the layout. And Natural England, in their response, have made a clear distinction between this and a C2 use. It's there on their fourth bullet point. So I think we just need to be very careful that we're suggesting that they're the same, when in reality there's clear material reasons why they're not, and in any event, Natural England make a clear distinction between the two. They haven't objected against the C2.
I don't think Natural England have got the faintest idea what almshouses are.
That may be your view, but they're the statutory body, and they carry significant weight in this legal test. In terms of the appropriate assessment, I will just need to quickly pull that up. But I think in terms of how I would refer to it, if we take the start, it's the screening, and then you go to the appropriate assessment. So I think the impact pathways relate to recreational pressure. So the adverse impact would be in relation to recreational pressure, and cat predation, I believe, is also in there. But
Recreational pressure and cat prevention are the two main reasons that we're recording.
Let me go to the document so I can give you a clear answer, because I don't want to cause any confusion. Is it this one here?
Yes.
So there's bullet points on the second page of the AA document, and it says, at this stage, the Council cannot rule out likely significant effects on the SPA or SAC alone or in combination with other plans or projects based on information provided by the applicant, because the proposed proposal could undermine conservation objectives of these sites. This is because the proposal lies within 400 metres of the SPA and represents a net increase in dwellings within the 400 metre buffer zone of the Thames Basin Special Protection Area, which will lead to an increase in local population and a potential increase in recreational activity on the SPA from the people occupying the proposed development, and disturbance of the protected ground nesting birds from dogs kept as pets kept as dogs. The possibility of predation of the protected ground nesting birds by cats kept as pets from the development. For the reasons above, there is a presumption against use of sea-free residential development in the 400 metre buffer zone of the SPA. There is another bullet point on traffic movements, but that is then scoped out. So that is stage one. That then goes into the appropriate assessment, and when we go through the appropriate assessment, we aren't able to rule out those impacts based on that assessment and the evidence provided, the response provided by Natural England in their role as the relevant statutory body for the Habitats and Species Regulations.
But the almshouses have given an absolute undertaking that they will overcome all of that. And pure common sense in terms of recreation, they're not going to cross that road.
You may think that's common sense, it's not evidence. It's not evidence in the tests. But the evidential bar is to prove to prove that it won't, to prove that it would meet the test. And we can rely on policy.
Thank you. I think having that clarity will be really helpful for appeal. Thank you, Kieran.
That's okay.
Councillor Julie Hord, and then I'll be wrapping up with the final question.
Thank you, Chair. It's my understanding from the briefings we've had, and I want to just put this out there and tell me if I have it wrong, that the onus does not sit with Natural England to demonstrate with scientific certainty that harm will be caused. They just have to raise a concern that they think that there's reason that harm will be concerned. The onus sits with the applicant to demonstrate with scientific certainty that harm will not be caused. And if we have not seen here things that make us feel that yes, there is scientific certainty that harm will not be caused, then that's where we're at. Is that a quick, correct assessment? Thank you.
Yes, that's a good summary. The burden of proof is on the applicant, and that goes back to our balancing test that we've discussed.
I'm going to call the last question.
Sorry, Councillor Hode said something about scientific certainty, but that's never achievable, is it? We're talking about scientific reasonable doubt. That's correct, right?
It's reasonable scientific doubt, but there's no scientific evidence that's been put forward. Where you are going to make that case, you do need evidence, and that is not in front of us.
Thank you. I've got the last question for the officers. Tonight's been very technical, very emotional, but this is about SPAs. Could you tell us why the SPAs were created, and prior to that, what had been lost that the SPA was to save?
I will try my best, but that's quite a significant...
brief.
Well, it was identified as part of the Natura sites in 2000, which was when we were part of the European Union. Then Natural England did an assessment, and in 2005 objected against all net new residential development because of the impacts on 3 protected bird species, namely the nightjar, the skylark and the Dartford warbler, and they are the basis for which the designation has been put in place.
Do you know what the reduction was in their numbers?
I think my knowledge may limit there. I can get the numbers for you, but...
Yeah. Well, the scientific review does say about 80%. Yeah, it's here to do. It's to draw a line under it. Let's hope so. Members, if you have no further questions, the office recommend the following. A, to agree the content of the appropriate assessment and to include that the development is likely to have a significant effect upon the integrity of the SPA, and B, to refuse planning on 220828 of FU. The reasons for refusal are as follows. The planning authority is unable to satisfy itself that the proposal would not have an adverse effect on the integrity of the Thames Basin Heath special protection areas. In this respect, significant concerns remain regard to the adverse effect, I just read the lie, sorry, of the special protection area in that there is likely to be an increase in dog walking, general recreational use and damage to the habitat and the protected species within the protected areas. Accordingly, the panelling authority must refuse permission in accordance with the regulation 63.5 of the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulation 2017 or as subsequently amended. For the same reason, the proposed conflicts with guidance contained in the National Planning Policy Framework 2018 and Policy CP14 of the Surrey Health Core Strategy and Development Management Policies of 2012. Policy NRM6 of the South East Plan 2009 and the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area Avoidance Strategy Supplementary Planning Document adopted January 2012. We will therefore need to vote on this recommendation first. Before I'm taking this vote, I'd like to remind members that the vote is not carried, then we cannot simply allow this application tonight. This is because the officer's report and the presentation sets out that the steps required, including the requirement for a positively worded appropriate assessment, to be drafted and directed by members, to reconsult Natural England on this, and finally to agree the wording of the legal agreement to secure the mitigation. Do I have a proposer and a seconder, please, for the officer recommendation? Councillor David Whitcroft. Councillor Richard Wilson. Jenny?
Thank you, Chair. All those for, please raise your hand and keep them raised until I say your name. So that's Councillor Helen Whitcroft, Councillor Julie Hode, Councillor Dave Hoff, Councillor David O'Mahony, Councillor Nirmal Kang, Councillor David Whitcroft, Councillor Richard Wilson. All those against, please raise your hand. That's Councillor Sean Garrett, Councillor Jonathan Quinn, Councillor Victoria Wheeler and Councillor Valerie White. Any abstentions? No abstentions.
The officer recommendation has been approved, and that is to agree the contents of the appropriate assessment and to conclude that the development is likely to have a significant effect upon the integrity of the SPA and to refuse planned admission 220828. Thank you very much. The meeting's over.